In Lansing, Michigan, a 67-year-old retired teacher was about to face the cruelest betrayal of her life. What started as saying goodbye to her beloved husband took a shocking turn when she came face to face with his children's calculated exclusion. Olivia Brown wasn't your typical grieving widow. For 15 years, she had tried bridging the gap with David's children, known for her patient determination. When she encountered their systematic shutdown at the funeral reception, she had no idea they were making the biggest mistake of their lives. Olivia's quiet dignity would lead to devastating consequences. What began as grief would become the most expensive lesson in loyalty ever taught. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The silence in St. Mary's Lutheran Church felt heavier than the October rain drumming against the stained glass windows. Olivia Brown sat in the front pew, her hands folded in her lap with the practiced composure of a woman who had learned to swallow her pain whole. The empty seats stretched on either side of her like a no-man's land, while across the aisle, David's children huddled together with their families in a tight cluster of shared grief that deliberately excluded her. 15 years. 15 years of marriage, and she might as well have been a stranger who had wandered into the wrong funeral. Pastor Thomas Anderson's voice carried across the sanctuary, with the gentle authority of a man who had presided over countless farewells. David Brown was a man who understood that loyalty isn't inherited. It's earned through daily acts of kindness, through standing by those we love when the world grows cold. The irony wasn't lost on Olivia. She watched Michael's profile as he stared straight ahead, his jaw set in that stubborn line that reminded her so painfully of David. At 45, David's eldest son carried himself with the confidence of a man who had never questioned his place in the world, never doubted that the universe owed him exactly what he expected to receive. His wife Sandra sat beside him with their teenage twins, the family portrait of respectability that Michael had always cultivated so carefully. Jennifer shifted in her seat, her perfectly styled auburn hair catching the dim light filtering through the church windows. Even in grief, David's daughter maintained the polished appearance that had served her well in Lansing's social circles. Her husband Paul kept checking his phone discreetly, a lawyer's habit that had always irritated David, though he'd never said so directly. Only to Olivia, in the quiet moments after family dinners, had he expressed his frustration with his son-in-law's inability to simply be present. Tyler sat at the end of the family row, his shoulders hunched in a way that made him look younger than his 38 years. As a high school counselor, he understood family dynamics professionally, but Olivia could see the conflict written in every line of his posture. His wife, Emma, kept glancing toward Olivia with something that might have been sympathy, but Tyler's gentle hand on her arm redirected her attention each time. David believed that family isn't just about blood, Pastor Anderson continued, his eyes briefly meeting Olivia's across the congregation. It's about the people who choose to stand with you, who celebrate your joys and carry your sorrows as their own. A memory surfaced unbidden, David's 60th birthday party 7 years ago. Olivia had spent weeks planning it, reaching out to his children, coordinating schedules, preparing his favorite meal. She'd bought a new dress, something blue that David always said made her eyes sparkle. But when the evening arrived, the children had commandeered the celebration, moving it to Michael's house without consulting her, leaving her to explain to the neighbors why the party they'd been invited to was suddenly canceled. David had been furious, but quietly so. He'd taken her out to dinner instead, just the two of them, and told her that her efforts meant more to him than any party ever could. But she'd seen the hurt in his eyes, the disappointment in his children that he tried so hard to hide. The measure of a man, Pastor Anderson's voice pulled her back to the present, isn't in what he accumulates, but in how he treats those who can do nothing for him in return. Michael's hand tightened on Sandra's, and Olivia wondered if he understood the weight of those words. Probably not. Michael had always seen kindness as weakness, generosity as foolishness. When David had quietly paid for Tyler's daughter's summer camp 3 years running, the camp that Tyler couldn't quite afford on a counselor's salary but was too proud to ask for help with, Michael had called it enabling poor financial planning. The organ began the opening notes of Amazing Grace, and Olivia's throat tightened. She and David had chosen this hymn together years ago, sitting in their kitchen on a Sunday morning, planning their own funerals the way other couples planned vacations. It had seemed morbid to some, but David had always been practical about death. "I want to make sure you're not left guessing what I would have wanted," he'd said, reaching across the table to squeeze her hand. The congregation stood, and Olivia rose with them, her voice joining the familiar melody. Across the aisle, she could hear Jennifer's clear soprano, the same voice that had once lit up Christmas mornings when she was young. Olivia remembered those early years of her marriage to David, how she'd tried to step carefully around the children's memories of their mother, Linda, how she'd hoped that patience and genuine care might eventually earn her a place in their hearts. She'd been naive. The hymn ended, and people began to file out of the pews. The pallbearers, Michael, Tyler, and 4 of David's longtime business associates, moved forward with practiced precision. Olivia watched her husband's casket being lifted, the finality of it hitting her with fresh force. David was gone. The man who had seen her worth when his children couldn't, who had loved her with the quiet steadiness of deep water, was gone. She fell into step behind the casket, her black heels clicking softly on the church's worn wooden floors. The walk down the aisle felt eternal, every eye in the congregation tracking her movement. Some faces were kind, neighbors who had known her and David as a couple, fellow volunteers from the community theater where they'd met, former students who remembered her fondly from her teaching days. Others were neutral, curious, the expressions of people attending more out of respect for David's business standing than personal affection. Outside, the October air carried the sharp bite of approaching winter. The hearse waited with its back doors open like a mouth ready to swallow the last physical presence of her husband. Olivia stood to the side as the pallbearers completed their duty, her coat pulled tight against the wind. People began to disperse, heading to their cars, murmuring condolences as they passed. Olivia accepted each one with a gracious nod, the responses automatic, after a lifetime of teaching politeness to teenagers. "Thank you for coming." David would have appreciated it. He meant so much to all of us. She was speaking to Mrs. Henderson from the library board when she heard Jennifer's voice, pitched just loud enough to carry. "The reception is at the house, of course. Just family, you understand. We need some time to process everything together." Olivia's conversation with Mrs. Henderson faltered. She turned slightly, seeing Jennifer speaking to the Clarks, a couple who had been social friends of the family for years. Jennifer's voice carried that particular tone of regretful explanation that Olivia had learned to recognize over the years, the sound of a door being politely, but firmly closed. "Of course," Mrs. Clark was saying. "Family time is so important. Please give our regards to everyone." Michael appeared at Jennifer's elbow, his face set in lines of appropriate sorrow that somehow managed to convey authority at the same time. "We appreciate everyone coming today." Dad would have been touched by the turnout. Olivia stood frozen, watching the casual efficiency with which they managed the crowd, directing the flow of people like traffic controllers. No one looked at her for confirmation or included her in the planning. She was simply absent from their calculations. Tyler approached, his steps hesitant. For a moment, Olivia thought he might say something, might extend the invitation that his siblings had so pointedly withheld. He stopped in front of her, his brown eyes, so like David's, filled with obvious discomfort. "Olivia, He glanced back toward his siblings, then at his wife, who was watching with evident concern. Today was beautiful. Dad would have liked the service. She waited, hope and humiliation warring in her chest. But Tyler's courage failed him, as it always did when faced with the choice between doing right and keeping peace with his family. "Take care of yourself," he said finally, the words hollow with everything he wasn't saying. Olivia nodded, not trusting her voice. She watched as Tyler rejoined his family, saw the way they closed ranks naturally, automatically, around him. The conversation resumed. Logistics discussed. Plans finalized. All without her. Pastor Anderson approached as the family group began moving toward their cars. His weathered face was kind but troubled, and Olivia could see that he understood exactly what was happening. "Mrs. Brown," he said quietly, "would you like me to drive you home?" The offer was gentle, but it highlighted her isolation more starkly than anything else could have. She was 67 years old, at her husband's funeral, and no one in his family had even thought to ask how she was getting home. "That's very kind, Pastor, but I have my car." She managed a smile that felt like it might crack her face. "Thank you for the service." It was exactly what David would have wanted. He nodded, his eyes holding a warmth that almost undid her composure. "He was a good man, Mrs. Brown, and he loved you very much. Don't let anyone make you forget that." The words were clearly chosen with purpose, and Olivia felt a rush of gratitude for this man who had seen them together at church functions, who had witnessed the quiet devotion in David's eyes when he looked at her. She made her way to her car as the family convoy pulled away, Michael's BMW leading the procession back to the house that had been David's before it became theirs. The house where she was apparently no longer welcome on the day of her husband's funeral. Sitting in her Honda Accord, practical, reliable, chosen together with David's advice, Olivia watched the last of the mourners disappear into the gray October afternoon. The cemetery workers would handle the burial. She wouldn't even be present for David's final moment above ground. The rain began again as she started the engine, droplets racing down the windshield like tears she was too numb to shed. 15 years of marriage and she was driving away from her husband's funeral alone, excluded from his children's grief as if her own meant nothing at all. As she pulled out of the church parking lot, Olivia caught sight of herself in the rearview mirror. Her hair was silver now, had been for years, but her eyes were still the same blue that David had fallen in love with at a community theater rehearsal 15 years ago. She'd been playing Martha in Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf, and he'd been working on set construction, a recent widower trying to fill his evenings with something other than memories. "You have the most expressive eyes," he'd told her after the final performance. "They tell stories even when you're not speaking." What story were they telling now? She wondered. What would David see if he could look at her in this moment? The house felt cavernous when she unlocked the front door. Every room held echoes of the life she and David had built together. His reading chair by the window, the kitchen table where they'd shared countless breakfasts, the bedroom where he'd died in his sleep just 5 days ago, his heart simply stopping as if it had decided its work was done. Olivia set her purse on the hall table and walked slowly through rooms that felt both familiar and foreign without David's presence. This was her life now. Silence where there had been conversation, empty spaces where David's quiet strength had filled the corners. The phone rang twice that evening, Sarah from her old teaching job checking on her, and Pastor Anderson making sure she had everything she needed. But there were no calls from Michael, Jennifer, or Tyler. No check-ins from the family she'd tried so hard to join. No acknowledgement that she might be grieving too. As darkness settled over Lansing, Olivia sat in David's chair and looked out at the yard they'd tended together. Somewhere across town, his children were sharing memories and making plans for a future that apparently didn't include her. They were dividing up pieces of their father while forgetting that she had loved him too, that her grief was as real and deep as their own. She closed her eyes and let herself remember the weight of David's hand in hers, the way he'd looked at her across the dinner table just last week, the quiet, "I love you," he'd whispered in the darkness of their bedroom. Whatever his children thought or felt about her, David had chosen her. He had loved her. And tomorrow, when the lawyer read his will, perhaps they would finally understand what that had meant to him. But tonight, in the crushing silence of her empty house, Olivia Brown sat alone with her grief and wondered if 15 years of trying to belong had been the biggest mistake of her life. The silence followed Olivia home like a shadow she couldn't shake. She moved through the front door with the careful steps of someone navigating in the dark, though every lamp in the house blazed against the October evening. The familiar scent of David's aftershave still lingered in the hallway, Old Spice and something distinctly him that she'd never been able to name. And it hit her with the force of a physical blow. 15 years of shared mornings, and she still expected to hear his voice calling from the kitchen, asking if she wanted coffee. The expectation was so strong that she paused, listening, before reality crashed down again with its terrible weight. Her black dress felt like armor she no longer needed, heavy and confining. In the bedroom they'd shared, Olivia caught sight of herself in the mirror above David's dresser. Her silver hair was still perfectly arranged from the funeral, her lipstick unsmudged, despite the day's trials. She looked composed, dignified, everything a widow should be. But her eyes told a different story, reflecting a hurt that went deeper than grief. The house seemed to echo with the absence of phone calls that should have come. By now, Michael should have called to check on her. Jennifer should have sent a text, at least. Even Tyler, with his gentle heart and counselor's understanding of loss, should have reached out. But her phone remained silent on the kitchen counter, as isolated as she felt. Olivia moved through the rooms like a ghost, touring her own life. In the living room, David's newspaper still lay folded beside his chair, the crossword puzzle half finished in his careful handwriting. The coffee mug he'd used that final morning sat in the dishwasher, waiting for a wash that would erase one more trace of him. She'd been putting off these small erasures, but now they felt inevitable. The mantelpiece held the gallery of their life together: wedding photos, vacation snapshots, pictures from community theater productions, where they'd both volunteered. But scattered among them were older photos, ones David had insisted on keeping: Michael's college graduation, Jennifer's wedding, Tyler's children at various ages. Even in death, she was sharing space with the family that had never fully accepted her. A soft knock at the front door broke through her reverie. For a moment, hope fluttered in her chest. Perhaps one of David's children had reconsidered, had come to include her in their grief. But when she opened the door, she found Sarah Johnson standing on the porch, holding a covered casserole dish and wearing the expression of someone who'd witnessed an injustice. "Don't even think about saying you're fine," Sarah said, pushing past Olivia into the house with the familiarity of a 15-year friendship. "I saw what happened at the church today, and I'm not leaving you alone to stew in it." Sarah had been Olivia's colleague during her final years of teaching, a fellow English teacher with the no-nonsense practicality of someone who'd raised 3 children as a single mother. She set the casserole on the kitchen counter and turned to study Olivia with the keen eye of a woman who'd learned to read between the lines of teenage excuses and adult pretenses. "They didn't invite you to the reception. It wasn't a question." Olivia sank into one of the kitchen chairs, the weight of the day finally overwhelming her careful composure. Jennifer made it very clear it was, quote, family only. As if 15 years of marriage doesn't qualify me for that designation. "Bastards," Sarah said with characteristic directness, then immediately softened her tone. "I'm sorry, honey. I know David loved those kids, but what they did today was unconscionable." The validation hit Olivia like a lifeline thrown to a drowning woman. For hours she'd been questioning herself, wondering if she'd misunderstood the situation, if her grief was making her oversensitive to perceived slights. But Sarah had witnessed it too, had seen the deliberate exclusion for what it was. "You know what really gets me?" Olivia's voice cracked slightly. "David always defended them. Every time they showed up late to dinner, every time they forgot to include me in family events, every Christmas when they bought gifts for each other but somehow never thought to get me anything, he'd make excuses for them. They're still processing their mother's death, he'd say. Give them time." Sarah poured 2 cups of coffee from the pot that Olivia had made but hadn't touched. "How much time is enough? Linda died over 20 years ago." I know that. But David, he saw the best in everyone, especially his children. He wanted so badly for us to be a real family." Olivia wrapped her hands around the warm mug, drawing comfort from its heat. "I think part of him believed that if he just loved me enough, they'd eventually follow his lead." "And what do you believe?" The question hung in the air like smoke. Olivia had spent so many years focused on earning acceptance, on proving her worth to people who seemed determined not to see it, that she'd rarely asked herself what she actually thought about the situation. "I think," she said slowly, "that they never wanted a stepmother. They wanted David to remain frozen in time, a monument to their mother's memory. My presence forced them to acknowledge that he'd moved on, that he'd found happiness again, and they resented him for it. Sarah nodded grimly. And they took that resentment out on you instead of dealing with their own issues. The kitchen fell quiet, except for the ticking of the clock above the stove, a wedding gift from David's business partner that had counted down the seconds of their marriage for 15 years. Olivia found herself thinking about time, about how much of it she'd spent trying to win over people who'd never intended to be won. David changed after we got married, she said suddenly. Not in big ways, but in little ones. He smiled more. He laughed at silly movies. He started taking vacations, something he'd never done with Linda because she was too sick toward the end. I think the kids saw that happiness and interpreted it as a betrayal of their mother's memory. Or maybe, Sarah suggested gently, they were jealous that you got the version of their father that grief and responsibility had never allowed him to be when they were growing up. The observation struck Olivia with unexpected force. She'd never considered that perspective, that David's children might resent not just her presence, but the man David had been able to become because of it. The freedom to be lighter, more spontaneous, more openly affectionate than the widowed father who'd raised them had been able to manage. A chime from Olivia's phone interrupted her thoughts. For a moment, her heart lifted. Perhaps one of the children had finally reached out. But when she checked the screen, it was a notification from Facebook. Against her better judgment, she opened it. Jennifer had posted a photo from the reception. The image showed the family gathered around David's dining room table, their faces appropriately somber but united in their shared grief. The caption read, "Celebrating Dad's life with family today. He would have loved seeing us all together, carrying on the traditions Mom started. #family first, #in memory of Dad." The post had already garnered dozens of likes and sympathetic comments. Friends and extended family members shared their own memories of David, praising Jennifer for keeping the family strong during this difficult time. Several people commented on how much David had loved family gatherings, how he would have been proud to see his children supporting each other. Not a single comment mentioned Olivia's absence. It was as if she'd been photoshopped out of David's life entirely. Sarah, reading over her shoulder, let out a string of curses that would have made her former students blush. The absolute gall of that woman. Traditions Mom started? You've been hosting their Christmas dinners for the past 10 years. Olivia stared at the photo, studying the faces of people she'd tried so hard to love. Michael looked every inch the successful businessman, his arm around his wife as if protecting her from invisible threats. Jennifer radiated the satisfied authority of someone orchestrating a perfect event. Tyler sat slightly apart from the others, his expression unreadable, but his body language suggesting discomfort. "Look at Tyler," she murmured. "He knows this is wrong." "Knowing and doing something about it are two different things," Sarah replied. "That boy's been caught between his conscience and his siblings his whole life. David used to worry about it." "He did?" "Oh, honey, David talked about his kids constantly. He was proud of them, yes, but he wasn't blind to their faults. He knew Michael was entitled, knew Jennifer could be manipulative, and he knew Tyler was too gentle for his own good, always getting steamrolled by the other two." The revelation that David had been aware of his children's shortcomings came as both relief and sadness. Relief that her perceptions hadn't been colored by jealousy or insecurity, and sadness that David had carried the burden of that knowledge while still trying to maintain family harmony. "He never said anything to me about it. Because he was protecting you. And probably protecting them too in his way. David was old school. He believed family problems should stay in the family." Sarah's expression softened. "But you were family, Olivia. You were his family. The family he chose." A soft knock at the front door interrupted them again. This time, Olivia approached with less hope and more wariness. Through the peephole, she saw a young man in a dark suit, holding a manila envelope. "Mrs. Brown? I'm from Henderson Funeral Home. I have Mr. Brown's personal effects." She signed for the envelope with trembling hands, her signature looking strange and disconnected. The funeral director's assistant offered brief condolences before disappearing back into the night, leaving Olivia standing in her hallway holding the last physical pieces of her husband's life. Inside the envelope, she found David's wallet, still warm from his pocket that final morning. His wedding ring, removed by the medical examiner, felt impossibly heavy in her palm. His watch, a retirement gift she'd given him 5 years ago, had stopped at 3:47 a.m., the exact moment his heart had ceased its faithful rhythm. But it was the small leather notebook that made her breath catch. David had carried it everywhere, jotting down business reminders, phone numbers, random thoughts. She'd teased him about it countless times, calling it his external brain. Now it felt like holding a piece of his mind, his private thoughts made tangible. Sarah watched as Olivia turned the notebook over in her hands. "What is it?" "David's journal. He wrote in it every day. Business stuff, mostly, but sometimes personal observations." She felt suddenly protective of it, as if opening it would expose David's private thoughts to scrutiny he'd never intended. "Maybe you should read it," Sarah suggested gently. "It might help you understand what he was thinking, especially toward the end." Olivia clutched the notebook against her chest. The house felt impossibly quiet again, filled with the weight of all the conversations she and David would never have, all the ordinary moments that had been stolen by his sudden death. "I keep thinking about what Pastor Anderson said today," she murmured. "About family being the people who choose to stand with you. David chose me, Sarah. He chose me every day for 15 years. But his children, they never chose me at all." "No," Sarah agreed, "they didn't. And today they made that crystal clear." Outside, the October wind rattled the windows, and somewhere in the distance, a dog barked at shadows only it could see. The normal sounds of a normal evening in a normal neighborhood, while inside this house, Olivia held the remnants of a life that would never be normal again. As Sarah prepared to leave, promising to check in tomorrow, she paused at the door. "You know what I think, Olivia? I think David might have some surprises left for you. He was a smart man, and he wasn't blind to how his children treated you. Don't be shocked if he found a way to make his feelings known." Alone again, Olivia settled into David's chair with his notebook in her lap. She could smell his cologne on the fabric, could imagine the weight of his body in the cushions. Tomorrow she would have to start the process of learning to live without him. Tomorrow, she would have to face whatever legal and financial complications his death would bring. But tonight, she would read his words and remember what it felt like to be chosen, to be loved, to matter to someone who saw her worth even when his own children couldn't. Tonight, she would let David's voice comfort her one last time, speaking to her from the pages of his careful handwriting. And perhaps, in those pages, she would find the strength to face whatever came next with the dignity David had always admired in her, the quiet strength that his children had mistaken for weakness, but that he had recognized as her greatest asset. The strength that would carry her through the storms ahead and help her discover just how much her husband had truly valued the woman his children had spent 15 years trying to erase. The grandfather clock in the hallway chimed midnight as Olivia finally opened David's notebook, her hands trembling with something between reverence and trepidation. She'd made herself a cup of chamomile tea that had long since grown cold, but sleep felt impossible. The house creaked around her with familiar sounds, but without David's steady breathing beside her, even comfort felt foreign. The notebook's leather cover was worn smooth from years of handling, and when she opened it, David's handwriting greeted her like a voice from beyond. His penmanship had always been precise, the careful script of a man who'd built a business on attention to detail. The most recent entries were dated just days before his death. October 15th. Meeting with Henderson Industries Re. Spring contracts. Olivia made her famous pot roast tonight. Watched her face during dinner. She was trying so hard to include Michael and Sandra in conversation about the twins' college plans. Michael barely acknowledged her efforts. "Sometimes I wonder if I've failed them all by not addressing this sooner." Olivia's breath caught. She'd remembered that dinner differently, had focused on Michael's polite but distant responses rather than David's observations. She'd thought David hadn't noticed the subtle rebuffs, the way Michael had directed all his answers to his father while treating her questions as afterthoughts. October 12th. Jennifer called about Thanksgiving plans. Wants to host at her house this year for a change. When I suggested Olivia and I could help with preparations, there was that pause. The same pause I've been hearing for 15 years whenever I try to include my wife in family decisions. I'm tired of these pauses. Tired of pretending they don't mean what they obviously mean. Olivia flipped back through the pages, her heart racing as she discovered entry after entry documenting moments she'd thought David had missed or dismissed. His awareness was startling, his frustration palpable in the careful formation of each word. September 28th, Tyler's birthday party. Watched Olivia wrap the gift we'd chosen together. That expensive set of counseling reference books he'd mentioned wanting. She spent an hour making sure the presentation was perfect. At the party, Tyler thanked me twice for the thoughtful gift. Never once acknowledged that Olivia had been the one to remember his casual comment. Had researched the best editions. Had insisted we spend extra for the hardcover versions. I started to correct him, but the look on Olivia's face stopped me. She's learned not to expect credit for her kindness. That breaks my heart. The words blurred as tears filled her eyes. She'd convinced herself that these small erasures didn't matter, that her efforts were their own reward. But David had seen every instance, had catalogued each dismissal with the pain of someone watching his wife be slowly diminished. September 15th, Company Picnic Planning Committee meeting. Olivia volunteered to coordinate the children's activities again. She's done it for 8 years running, always makes it magical for the kids. Margaret from HR referred to her as David's wife when talking to new employees, as if after 15 years, Olivia still doesn't have her own identity in our community. When I introduced her as the coordinator, emphasizing her background in education, I saw the surprise on people's faces. They'd never thought to ask about her qualifications, her expertise. They've reduced her to my appendage. Olivia remembered that meeting differently. She'd focused on the warm reception her ideas had received, not on the subtle ways people had diminished her contributions. David's perspective revealed a pattern she'd trained herself not to see, a systematic reduction of her personhood that had become so normalized she'd stopped recognizing it as abnormal. As she read deeper into the notebook, months of observations painted a picture of a man growing increasingly frustrated with his family's treatment of his wife. But it was an entry from 3 months ago that made her hands shake with something beyond grief. July 20th. Called Robert Miller today. Enough is enough. If my children can't see Olivia's worth while I'm alive to witness their blindness, perhaps they'll understand it better when faced with the consequences of their behavior. I've spent too many years hoping they'd grow into the people I raised them to be. Time to stop enabling their selfishness and start protecting the woman who's shown them nothing but kindness for 15 years. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Robert Miller, David's attorney. Olivia knew the name from various business dealings, but David had always handled their legal affairs personally. She flipped forward, looking for more references, and found them scattered throughout the summer months. August 3rd, second meeting with Robert. Discussed the business succession plan. Michael assumes he'll inherit everything, has started making pronouncements about when Dad retires, as if it's a foregone conclusion. Haven't told him about the new management structure I've been developing with Patricia Collins. Let him assume what he will. Reality has a way of correcting false expectations. Patricia Collins. Olivia knew her as David's most trusted manager, a woman who'd worked her way up from the factory floor through sheer competence and dedication. David had often praised Patricia's understanding of the business, her rapport with the workers, her innovative approaches to efficiency problems. August 15th. Found the draft letter Jennifer wrote to the church committee about the Memorial Garden project. She mentioned, quote, the Brown family's commitment to the project, outlined our family's vision for honoring community members. Never once mentioned that Olivia designed the entire layout, that the botanical choices were based on her research into native Michigan plants, that the maintenance plan came from her conversations with local master gardeners. Jennifer has learned to steal credit so smoothly that I wonder if she even realizes she's doing it anymore. The Memorial Garden. Olivia had poured her heart into that project, drawing on her love of gardening and her desire to create something beautiful for the church community. She'd spent weeks researching plants that would bloom in succession throughout the growing season, had designed pathways that would be accessible for elderly parishioners, had even secured donations from local nurseries through her volunteer connections. When the committee had praised the Brown family's vision, she'd felt a familiar twist of disappointment but had said nothing. August 22nd, overheard Sandra telling someone at the grocery store that David's wife tries too hard to fit in, That it's sweet but a little desperate how Olivia volunteers for everything. Sweet but desperate. 15 years of genuine service to our community. And that's how my daughter-in-law characterizes it. If trying to contribute is desperation, what does that make their expectation of receiving without giving? The casual cruelty of the comment hit Olivia like a physical blow. She'd always sensed Sandra's cool assessment, had noticed the way Michael's wife observed her with the clinical interest of someone studying a specimen. But to hear her kindness characterized as desperation, her genuine desire to contribute dismissed as social climbing, hurt in ways she hadn't expected. She turned the page and found something that made her heart stop entirely. September 1st. Robert presented the first draft today. Olivia would be shocked to know she's inheriting everything. The house, the business, all of it. I've left the children modest trust funds. Enough to be comfortable, but not enough to maintain the lifestyle they've assumed was their birthright. Michael hasn't worked a day at the company, but he talks about it like it's already his. Jennifer spends money we haven't made yet on the assumption that she'll inherit her quote, fair share. Only Tyler shows any humility about the family's wealth, any recognition that money is earned, not owed. Olivia set the notebook down with trembling hands. The words seemed to shimmer on the page, their implications too enormous to process. She was inheriting everything? The business that Michael had assumed would be his? The estate that Jennifer had factored into her financial planning? September 8th. Robert asked if I was certain about the decision. Am I certain? I'm certain that Olivia has been the best thing to happen to this family in 20 years. I'm certain that she's shown my children more patience and kindness than they've ever shown her. I'm certain that if something happens to me, they'll exclude her from their grief just like they've excluded her from their joy. And I'm certain that actions have consequences, something my children seem to have forgotten. The notebook slipped from her lap as the full weight of David's words hit her. He hadn't just been aware of his children's behavior. He'd been planning a response to it. All those times she'd thought he was passively accepting their treatment of her, he'd been quietly documenting it, building a case for justice she'd never imagined possible. She picked up the notebook again, her hands steadier now, driven by a need to understand the full scope of David's planning. September 15th, met with Patricia about the transition plan. She's been essentially running operations for 2 years anyway. Making it official won't change much day to day. What will change is that decisions will be made by someone who understands the value of hard work, rather than someone who's never worked hard at anything. Patricia cried when I told her about the promotion structure. She's never expected recognition for her contributions, much like Olivia. Perhaps that's why I trust them both completely. September 22nd. Michael stopped by the office today, making assumptions about his future role in the company. He has ideas about modernizing, by which he means eliminating the employee profit-sharing program I've spent 10 years building, cutting the health benefits that make us competitive in recruiting, automating processes that would put 30 people out of work. His vision of efficiency is my definition of cruelty. He sees the business as an asset to be optimized rather than a community to be nurtured. October 1st, Jennifer called with ideas for redecorating the house after Olivia doesn't need all that space anymore. The casual assumption that Olivia would simply disappear from the family property, would fade into the background like an inconvenient memory, crystallizes everything wrong with how they see her. She's not their stepmother to them. She's a temporary resident whose lease is contingent on my continued existence. Each entry built a case that Olivia had never realized David was constructing. His love for his children was evident in every line, but so was his disappointment in who they'd become. More than that, his love for her shone through every observation, every documented kindness that had gone unacknowledged, every instance where she'd been diminished or erased. Near the back of the notebook, she found a draft of a letter that took her breath away. Dear Michael, I'm writing this knowing I may never send it, but hoping that putting these words on paper will help me find clarity about our family's future. You've spent 15 years waiting for Olivia to prove herself worthy of our family, setting tests she didn't know she was taking, and moving the goalposts every time she came close to meeting your expectations. What you fail to understand is that the test was never meant for her. It was meant for all of you. Olivia passed 15 years ago when she chose to love a grieving widower and his damaged children. You've been failing ever since you decided that blood matters more than character, that your mother's memory is threatened by my happiness. that kindness is weakness, and generosity is manipulation. I raised you to be better than this. Your mother would be ashamed of who you've become, and I'm tired of making excuses for behavior that has no excuse. The letter ended there, unfinished but devastating in its honesty. David had seen everything, understood everything, and had been planning to address it in the most final way possible. Olivia closed the notebook and sat in the silence of her living room, David's presence more real to her in that moment than it had been since his death. He hadn't been the passive observer she'd imagined. He'd been building a case, gathering evidence, preparing to deliver justice for years of accumulated cruelty. Tomorrow, she would call Robert Miller. Tomorrow, she would learn the full extent of David's final gift to her. Not just his inheritance, but his validation, his recognition, his answer to 15 years of questions about whether she truly belonged in this family. But tonight, for the first time since David's death, Olivia Brown smiled. She wasn't alone in her grief after all. David's love for her lived on in every carefully documented observation. In every instance where he'd seen her worthwhile, others remained blind to it. His children had excluded her from their farewell, but David had included her in his final act of love. And she suspected that when Robert Miller opened David's will, Michael, Jennifer, and Tyler would finally understand what their father had been trying to teach them all along. That family isn't about blood or inheritance or social standing. It's about love, loyalty, and the choice to see value in others. They'd had 15 years to make that choice. Now they would live with the consequences of refusing to make it. As she climbed the stairs to the bedroom she'd shared with David, Olivia carried his notebook with her like a sacred text. Tomorrow would bring revelations that would change everything, but tonight, she would sleep peacefully for the first time since his death, wrapped in the certainty that she had been loved, valued, and chosen by a man who saw her clearly and loved what he saw. The children who had excluded her from their grief were about to discover that their father had included her in everything that mattered. And for the first time in 15 years, Olivia Brown fell asleep looking forward to tomorrow. The Last Will, Part 4, The Attorney's Revelation. The morning sun cast long shadows across the parking lot of Miller & Associates as Olivia sat in her car, gathering courage she didn't know she possessed. 3 days had passed since the funeral. 3 days since she'd discovered David's notebook and the revolutionary truth hidden in its pages. Sleep had come easier since then, but her dreams were filled with anticipation rather than grief, a strange transformation that left her feeling guilty and empowered in equal measure. Robert Miller's law office occupied the second floor of a renovated Victorian house on Michigan Avenue, its burgundy shutters and brass nameplate projecting the kind of understated authority that had appealed to David's practical sensibilities. Olivia had driven past this building countless times over the years, never imagining she'd one day climb these steps as the central figure in a drama that would reshape everything she thought she knew about her place in the world. The receptionist, a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and the efficient manner of someone who'd spent decades managing other people's crises, smiled warmly as Olivia approached. "Mrs. Brown? Mr. Miller is expecting you. I'm so sorry for your loss. David was a wonderful man." The acknowledgement of her connection to David, simple and genuine, nearly brought tears to Olivia's eyes. After 3 days of being erased from family narratives, this stranger's recognition of her grief felt like water in a desert. Robert Miller's office reflected the same blend of tradition and practicality that had characterized David's approach to business. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves lined the walls, filled with legal texts that showed the wear of actual use rather than mere decoration. A mahogany desk dominated the center of the room, its surface organized with the precision of a man who understood that other people's futures often depended on his attention to detail. Miller himself rose from behind the desk as she entered, a tall, silver-haired man in his late 50s whose handshake conveyed both strength and compassion. His eyes held the weighted look of someone who'd spent decades delivering news that changed lives. But there was something else there too, something that might have been anticipation. "Mrs. Brown, please, sit down." His voice carried the measured cadence of courtroom experience, but it was softened by genuine warmth. "Before we begin, I want you to know how deeply sorry I am for your loss. David was not just a client but a friend, and his death is a tremendous loss for our entire community." Olivia settled into the leather chair across from his desk, clutching her purse with hands that trembled slightly. "Thank you, Mr. Miller. That means more than you know. Please, call me Robert. David and I worked together for over 20 years, and in all that time, I never saw him happier than he was after he married you." Miller's statement was delivered with the quiet authority of someone stating an observable fact. "He talked about you constantly, your kindness, your intelligence, your patience with his children." The mention of David's children sent a familiar pang through Olivia's chest, but it was accompanied now by something new. The knowledge that David had seen their behavior clearly and had chosen to act on her behalf. "I found his notebook," she said quietly. "After the funeral home returned his personal effects, and I read his entries from the past few months." Miller's eyebrows rose slightly, but his expression suggested he wasn't entirely surprised. David mentioned he'd been keeping detailed records. He was always thorough in his documentation. It served him well in business and, I suspect, gave him clarity about family matters as well. "The entries mention meetings with you. About changes to his will." "Yes." Miller leaned back in his chair, his expression becoming more formal as he shifted into professional mode. "David came to see me for the first time about this matter in July. He'd been thinking about estate planning changes for some time, but certain incidents had crystallized his thinking." "What kind of incidents?" Miller was quiet for a moment, clearly weighing his words. "David never spoke ill of his children, you understand. But he was a businessman, and businessmen learn to read patterns in behavior. He'd noticed certain attitudes, certain assumptions about inheritance and entitlement, that troubled him deeply." Olivia thought about the notebook entries, David's careful documentation of every slight, every erasure, every moment when his children had treated her as less than family. He was building a case. In a manner of speaking, yes. David understood that actions have consequences, and he wanted those consequences to reflect his actual values rather than his children's assumptions about what they deserved. Miller reached into his desk drawer and withdrew a thick manila folder. "The formal reading is scheduled for next week, with all family members present, but David left specific instructions for me to meet with you privately first. He was concerned about how his children might react to the will's contents, and he wanted you to be prepared." Olivia's heart began to race. Reading about David's intentions in his private notebook was one thing. Hearing them confirmed by his attorney was something else entirely. "How prepared do I need to be?" Miller's smile held a hint of something that might have been satisfaction. David revised his will completely 3 months ago. The previous version left equal shares of his estate to his 3 children, with provisions for you to remain in the house and receive a modest monthly stipend. The new version is significantly different. He opened the folder and withdrew a document bound in blue legal backing. "In the current will, you are named as the primary beneficiary of David's entire estate. This includes the family residence, all investment accounts, retirement funds, and full ownership of Brown Auto Parts." The words hit Olivia like a physical force. She'd read hints of this in David's notebook, but hearing it stated with legal precision made it real in a way that still seemed impossible. "Everything?" "Everything. David's children are each left trust funds of $50,000, substantial enough to provide security, but modest compared to the overall estate value of approximately $2–3 million. Olivia gripped the arms of her chair, her mind reeling. The business too? The business too. David spent considerable time restructuring the management team in preparation for this transition. Patricia Collins has been promoted to general manager with a clear succession plan that doesn't require owner involvement in day-to-day operations. David was very specific that you should feel no pressure to involve his children in business decisions unless you choose to do so. The implications crashed over her in waves. Michael, who had spent years assuming he would inherit his father's business, would instead receive a trust fund that wouldn't even cover his mortgage for 2 years. Jennifer, who had factored her inheritance into her social planning, would discover that her fair share was a fraction of what she'd expected. Tyler, the only one who'd shown her any kindness, would receive the same modest amount as his siblings, not as punishment, but because David's justice was impartial. "There's more," Miller continued, his voice taking on the tone of someone delivering a particularly significant revelation. David also left a sealed letter to be read aloud during the will reading. He was very specific that his reasoning should be understood by everyone present. "What does it say?" Miller's expression grew solemn. "I can't share the exact contents. David wanted his words to have full impact when delivered to the family together. But I can tell you that it's a thoughtful, detailed explanation of his decision-making process. He documents specific examples of behavior that influenced his thinking, and he makes it clear that this wasn't a decision made in anger or haste, but one reached after careful consideration of his children's characters and choices." Olivia felt a surge of something she'd rarely experienced in her adult life: vindication. David's love for her hadn't been abstract or sentimental. It had been practical, observant, and ultimately protective. He'd seen her worth when others couldn't, and he'd acted on that recognition in the most concrete way possible. "How will they react?" she asked, though she suspected she already knew. Miller's smile was grim. David anticipated significant resistance. "Michael has already made inquiries about contesting the will, though he doesn't yet know what it contains. Jennifer has been discussing inheritance tax strategies with her husband's law firm. They're operating under assumptions that are about to be dramatically corrected. Can they contest it successfully? Unlikely." David was very thorough in his preparation. He underwent a complete medical evaluation to establish his mental competency. He documented his reasoning extensively. Most importantly, he met with me multiple times over several months, demonstrating that this was a considered decision rather than an impulsive one. Miller's expression grew more serious. "However, they can certainly try, and the process could be unpleasant for you personally." Olivia thought about the past 3 days, the exclusion from the funeral reception, Jennifer's social media posts erasing her from the family narrative, the complete absence of concern for her grief. They'd already shown her what unpleasant looked like. "Mr. Miller." "Robert, I need to ask you something directly. Do you think David made the right decision?" The attorney was quiet for a long moment, clearly weighing his professional obligations against his personal observations. Finally, he spoke with the careful precision of someone who'd spent decades choosing words that mattered. "I've been practicing estate law for 30 years, Mrs. Brown. I've seen families torn apart by greed, entitlement, and the assumption that love is the same thing as inheritance. I've also seen people like you, people who spend years giving more than they receive, who show kindness without expecting recognition, who understand that family is about more than blood relations." He leaned forward slightly, his voice taking on a more personal tone. "David was one of the most thoughtful, principled men I've ever known. If he believed this was the right way to honor his values and protect your future, then I trust his judgment completely." The validation was overwhelming. Olivia had spent so many years questioning her own perceptions, wondering if she was being too sensitive about the children's behavior, if she was expecting too much acceptance from people who had legitimate reasons to protect their father's memory. But David had seen what she'd seen, had reached the same conclusions about his children's character, and had acted accordingly. "There's one more thing," Miller said, reaching into the folder again. "David left this for you specifically, separate from the will. He instructed me to give it to you during our private meeting." He handed her a sealed envelope with her name written in David's familiar handwriting. Her fingers trembled as she opened it, revealing a single sheet of paper covered with the careful script she'd been reading in his notebook. "My dearest Olivia, if you're reading this, then I'm gone, and you're discovering that I've left you everything that mattered to me. I hope this doesn't come as too much of a shock, though I suspect my notebook has prepared you somewhat for what Robert is telling you. I want you to know that this decision has nothing to do with anger at my children and everything to do with love for you. You've spent 15 years proving your worth to people who were determined not to see it. You've shown kindness when you received indifference, offered inclusion when you were excluded, demonstrated grace under circumstances that would have broken lesser people. My children received my love and guidance for decades before you entered our lives. They had every advantage, every opportunity to grow into people of character and compassion. That they chose entitlement over empathy is their failure, not yours. You, my darling, received none of those advantages from me, yet you became everything I could have hoped for in a partner, and everything I should have required of my children as human beings. This inheritance isn't charity, it's recognition of who you are and what you've given to our family, whether they appreciated it or not. Use this gift to build the life you've always deserved. Travel to the places we talked about visiting. Support the causes that matter to you. And please, don't feel obligated to share what you've earned with people who never shared their hearts with you. You were the best decision I ever made, and this is the best decision I can make for you. All my love. David. Tears streamed down Olivia's face as she read David's final words to her. The letter wasn't just an explanation, it was an absolution, a release from 15 years of trying to earn acceptance from people who had never intended to grant it. Miller offered her tissues and waited patiently while she composed herself. When she finally looked up, he was watching her with the kind of professional compassion that came from years of helping people navigate life's most difficult transitions. The formal will reading is scheduled for next Tuesday at 2 o'clock, he said gently. All family members will be present, and I'll read both the will and David's explanatory letter. After that, there will likely be questions, discussions, and quite possibly some very strong reactions. Olivia folded David's letter carefully and tucked it into her purse alongside his notebook. For the first time since his death, she felt truly prepared for what lay ahead. The woman who had sat alone at the funeral, excluded and diminished, was gone. In her place sat David's chosen heir, armed with his love and his validation, ready to face whatever his children might throw at her. "I'll be there," she said, her voice steady with newfound confidence. "And Robert? Thank you for helping David protect me, even after he's gone." Miller smiled, and for the first time since she'd entered his office, he looked genuinely pleased. "It's been my honor, Mrs. Brown. David was a remarkable man, and he chose his final gift very wisely." As Olivia walked back to her car, she felt the weight of David's letter in her purse like a talisman. The autumn air seemed sharper, more invigorating than it had in days. She had 5 days until the will reading, 5 days to prepare for the moment when Michael, Jennifer, and Tyler would learn that actions have consequences, that love isn't automatic, and that their stepmother, the woman they'd spent 15 years trying to erase, was about to become the most important person in their financial future. For the first time since David's death, Olivia Brown was looking forward to seeing his children again. They'd excluded her from their grief, but David had included her in everything that would matter to them going forward. And she suspected that Tuesday afternoon would be the most educational 2 hours of their entire lives. The conference room at Miller & Associates felt like a courtroom awaiting verdict as Olivia entered at precisely 1:58 p.m. She'd chosen her outfit carefully, a navy blue suit that David had always said made her look authoritative, paired with the pearl necklace he'd given her for their 10th anniversary. She wanted to look like someone worthy of inheriting an empire, not someone apologizing for her presence. Michael was already seated at the polished mahogany table, his posture radiating the confidence of a man who believed he was about to inherit his birthright. He'd brought his own attorney, a sharp-faced man in an expensive suit who kept checking his phone and making notes on a legal pad. Sandra sat beside her husband, her expression carefully neutral but her designer handbag clutched tightly in her lap like armor. Jennifer occupied the chair across from Michael, her perfectly styled hair and understated makeup, creating the image of someone prepared for a social media moment. She'd posted on Facebook that morning about handling family business with grace during difficult times, accompanied by a carefully filtered photo of herself looking thoughtfully out a window. Her husband Paul sat beside her, his lawyer's training evident in the way he observed everyone's body language with clinical interest. Tyler had claimed the chair nearest the window, as far from the family cluster as possible while still technically being part of the group. His discomfort was written in every line of his posture, shoulders hunched, hands clasped tightly in his lap, eyes fixed on the table's wood grain as if studying it might provide escape from the situation. His wife Emma had stayed home with their children, a decision that Tyler had explained as, quote, not wanting to expose them to family drama. but which Olivia suspected meant Tyler couldn't bear to have witnesses to whatever ugliness might unfold. Robert Miller entered the room, carrying a thick folder and wearing the expression of a man who'd spent decades delivering news that changed lives. He nodded to each person present with professional courtesy, but his smile for Olivia carried a warmth that didn't extend to the others. "Thank you all for coming," Miller began, settling behind the small lectern at the head of the table. "I know this is a difficult time for the family, and I appreciate your patience as we handle David's final wishes." Michael leaned forward, his businessman's instincts engaged. "Before we begin, I want to establish the process for business transition. I've been developing a 5-year plan for modernizing operations, and I think Dad would want us to implement it as quickly as possible." The presumption in his voice was staggering, but Olivia felt no anger, only a kind of detached fascination at watching someone prepare to leap off a cliff without realizing there was no net below. Miller's expression remained professionally neutral. "Mr. Brown, I think it would be best if we review the will's contents before discussing implementation of any plans." Jennifer shifted in her chair, her social media training evident in the way she arranged her features into an expression of appropriate solemnity. "Of course. We're all eager to understand Dad's wishes and honor his memory appropriately." "Very well." Miller opened the folder and withdrew the document that Olivia now knew would detonate like a bomb in the center of their expectations. The last will and testament of David Robert Brown, dated July 28th of this year. Olivia noticed Tyler's sharp intake of breath at the date. As a counselor, he was trained to notice details that others missed, and the recent revision clearly registered as significant. David begins with a statement about his mental capacity and the voluntary nature of this document, Miller continued, his voice taking on the formal cadence of legal proceedings. He specifically notes that this will supersedes all previous versions and reflects his considered judgment about how his estate should be distributed. Michael's attorney made a note on his pad, probably regarding the mental capacity language that David had been careful to include. "The will proceeds to specific bequests," Miller said, his eyes briefly meeting Olivia's across the table. "To my son Michael Brown, I leave the sum of $50,000 to be held in trust and distributed according to the terms outlined in Appendix A." The silence that followed was profound. Michael's face went through a series of expressions: confusion, disbelief, and then a dawning horror as the implications hit him. $50,000 wasn't nothing, but it wasn't the multi-million-dollar inheritance he'd been planning his future around. "I'm sorry," Michael said, his voice carefully controlled. "Could you repeat that?" Miller repeated the bequest with the same measured tone. Michael's attorney leaned over to whisper something urgent in his client's ear, but Michael waved him off, his attention fixed on Miller with laser intensity. "To my daughter Jennifer Brown Williams," Miller continued, "I leave the sum of $50,000 to be held in trust and distributed according to the terms outlined in Appendix B." Jennifer's carefully constructed composure cracked like ice under pressure. "That can't be right. Dad promised. He always said we'd be taken care of, that the family business would stay in the family." "To my son Tyler Brown," Miller read steadily, "I leave the sum of $50,000 to be held in trust and distributed, according to the terms outlined in Appendix C." Tyler's response was different from his siblings. Instead of outrage or disbelief, his face showed something that might have been relief mixed with resignation, as if he'd suspected this outcome and was almost grateful to have his expectations confirmed rather than raised and dashed. The room crackled with tension as the three siblings processed what they'd heard. Michael was the first to find his voice. "This is impossible. Dad wouldn't. There has to be more. What about the business? What about the house? What about the rest of the estate?" Miller's expression remained impassive. "To my beloved wife, Olivia Brown, I leave the remainder of my estate in its entirety. This includes the family residence, all investment and retirement accounts, and full ownership of Brown Auto Parts, including all assets, equipment, and property associated with the business." The explosion, when it came, was everything Olivia had expected, and more. Michael shot to his feet with such force that his chair crashed backward. "This is fraud! Dad would never." Someone manipulated him, coerced him. "This isn't his will. It's some kind of—" "Sit down, Michael." Miller's voice carried the authority of someone who dealt with difficult clients for decades. Your father was of sound mind and body when this will was executed. He underwent a complete medical evaluation specifically to establish his mental competency. Jennifer's face had gone pale beneath her carefully applied makeup. But the business. Dad always said the business would stay in the family. We assumed the business is staying in the family, Miller said quietly. Mrs. Brown is David's family. The simple statement hit the room like a physical blow. For 15 years, David's children had treated Olivia as a temporary addition to their family structure, someone whose membership was contingent on their father's continued existence. Miller's words forced them to confront a reality they'd spent over a decade denying. Paul leaned over to whisper something to Jennifer, but she shook him off, her social consciousness finally cracking under the weight of financial reality. She manipulated him. Look at her, sitting there like she knew this was coming. She's been planning this. For the first time since the reading began, Olivia spoke. Her voice was calm, steady, carrying the authority of someone who'd taught teenagers for 30 years and knew how to handle tantrums. I learned about David's decision 5 days ago, Jennifer. The same day you posted on social media about how wonderful it was to celebrate his life with family, a celebration I wasn't invited to attend. The reminder of their exclusion tactics hit home. Tyler visibly winced while Michael's face flushed with something that might have been shame before hardening into defensive anger. You're not family, Michael said, his voice low and dangerous. You're someone who married our father after our mother died. Real family is blood, not some legal document. Miller cleared his throat. Actually, Mr. Brown, family is exactly a legal document. And your father was very clear about who he considered family. He reached for another paper from his folder. David also left a letter explaining his reasoning, which he specifically requested be read aloud at this gathering. No, Jennifer said quickly. We don't need to hear. The letter is part of the will, Miller interrupted. David was very specific, that his reasoning should be understood by everyone present. He unfolded the document and began to read in David's voice, bringing the dead man's words into the room with devastating clarity. To my children, I am writing this knowing that you will be shocked and perhaps hurt by my decisions regarding my estate. I want you to understand that these choices were not made in anger or haste, but after careful consideration of your behavior toward Olivia over the past 15 years. Michael, you have spent our entire marriage treating Olivia as a temporary inconvenience rather than a permanent member of our family. You've excluded her from business discussions, dismissed her ideas, and made it clear that you view her presence as a threat to your inheritance rather than a gift to our family. Your assumption that the business would automatically become yours, despite never having worked a day there, demonstrates an entitlement that your mother and I failed to discourage during your childhood. Jennifer, your talent for exclusion while maintaining plausible deniability has been particularly painful to witness. Your organization of family events that somehow never include Olivia, your social media posts that erase her contributions to our community, and your casual cruelty disguised as concern have shown me a side of your character that disappoints me deeply. Tyler, your gentle nature has always been your strength, but your inability to stand up for what's right when it conflicts with family pressure has been your weakness. You've watched your siblings treat Olivia poorly for years and done nothing to stop it, making you complicit in their cruelty through your silence. The words fell like stones into still water, each ripple spreading devastation across the faces of David's children. Tyler had tears in his eyes, while Michael looked like he'd been physically struck. Jennifer's mouth opened and closed soundlessly, her social media-trained responses failing her completely. Miller continued reading. Olivia, in contrast, has spent 15 years showing you nothing but kindness, patience, and genuine care. She has remembered your birthdays, attended your children's events, volunteered countless hours for causes you care about, and offered you the kind of unconditional support that should characterize family relationships. That you have been unable to recognize or reciprocate this generosity says nothing about her character and everything about yours. I am leaving my estate to Olivia because she has earned it through 15 years of being the kind of family member you refused to let her become. She has shown loyalty when you showed indifference, offered inclusion when you practiced exclusion, and demonstrated grace when you showed none. This is not a punishment. It is a recognition of worth. Olivia deserves everything I am leaving her, just as you deserve the consequences of treating her as less than family for 15 years. I love you all, but love without accountability is not love at all. It is enablement. I pray that you will learn from this experience and become the people I raised you to be. But whether you do or not, I am at peace knowing that the person who loved me most selflessly will be taken care of as she deserves. Your father, David Brown. The silence that followed the letter was absolute. Even Michael's attorney had stopped taking notes, apparently recognizing that this was beyond the realm of legal challenges and into the territory of moral reckoning. Tyler spoke first, his voice barely above a whisper. Dad knew. He saw everything we did, and he knew. Michael exploded again, his lawyer's restraining hand on his arm ignored completely. This is manipulation! She worked on him, made him think. Made him think what? Olivia's voice cut through his bluster like a blade. Made him think I deserved basic human decency? Made him think 15 years of kindness should be acknowledged? Made him think his wife should be included in his family? She stood slowly, drawing on every ounce of dignity she'd cultivated through years of teaching difficult students and dealing with hostile parents. Your father saw exactly what I saw, Michael. The difference is that he decided to do something about it. Jennifer found her voice, though it shook with emotion. You can't do this. The business? It's been in our family for generations. You don't understand what it means. I understand that your father built that business from nothing, Olivia replied evenly. I understand that he worked 16-hour days to create something meaningful for his community. And I understand that he was horrified by your plans to gut the employee benefits and profit-sharing programs that made Brown Auto Parts a good place to work. The reference to Michael's modernization plans he'd discussed freely, assuming he'd inherit the authority to implement them, hit like another bombshell. Michael's face went white as he realized his father had been listening, evaluating, and ultimately rejecting his vision for the company's future. Miller gathered his papers with the efficient movements of someone who'd presided over many such family explosions. The will is legally sound and has been properly executed. Mrs. Brown, you'll need to sign some paperwork to begin the transfer process, but the assets are yours immediately. Michael's attorney finally spoke up. We'll be filing challenges. Undue influence, mental incapacity. File whatever you like, Miller replied calmly. David anticipated such challenges and prepared accordingly. His medical records from the past year show perfect mental health. He met with me multiple times over several months, demonstrating deliberate consideration, and his reasoning is clearly documented. You're welcome to waste your money on legal fees, but the outcome is certain. One by one, David's children filed out of the conference room. Tyler paused at the door, his face wet with tears, and looked back at Olivia with something that might have been the beginning of understanding. I'm sorry, he said quietly. For all of it, Dad was right. I should have stood up for you. Then he was gone, leaving Olivia alone with Miller and the weight of her new reality. She was no longer the excluded stepmother, the woman trying to earn acceptance from people determined not to grant it. She was David Brown's chosen heir, the keeper of his legacy, and the most powerful person in his children's financial future. As she signed the papers that would transfer control of a $2.3 million empire to her name, Olivia thought about David's words in his notebook. Actions have consequences. His children had spent 15 years treating her as inconsequential. Now they would spend the rest of their lives discovering just how consequential she'd become. The war began before Olivia even made it home from the will reading. As she pulled into her driveway now, she reminded herself. Her phone buzzed with the first salvo, a text from an unknown number. You won't get away with this. People will know what you really are. By evening, Michael had hired Blackstone and Associates, Lansing's most aggressive probate litigation firm. Their reputation for scorched earth tactics preceded them into every courtroom, and their willingness to drag family disputes through years of expensive legal warfare was exactly what Michael's rage demanded. The preliminary challenges were filed within hours. Undue influence, mental incapacity, fraud, and coercion, every legal avenue that money could pursue. Jennifer's assault was more insidious, but no less vicious. She understood that in a town like Lansing, reputation mattered as much as legal precedent. Her first Facebook post went live at 11 p.m., carefully crafted to present herself as a grieving daughter, protecting her father's legacy from an opportunistic outsider. "Sometimes the people we trust most are the ones who hurt us deepest," she wrote alongside a photo of herself and David from Christmas 2 years ago. Dad's generosity and kind heart were taken advantage of by someone who saw an opportunity and seized it. "We're fighting not for money but for justice and the memory of a man who deserved better. Please keep our family in your prayers as we navigate this difficult betrayal. #JusticeForDad, #FamilyFirst. The post garnered immediate attention. Within hours, it had been shared dozens of times, accumulating comments that ranged from sympathetic support to outright vitriol directed at Olivia. Friends of the family who barely knew her felt qualified to judge her character based on Jennifer's carefully constructed narrative. The comments section became a feeding frenzy of speculation and condemnation. But Jennifer had underestimated the depth of Olivia's roots in the community and the number of people who had witnessed the family dynamics firsthand over the years. The first crack in their narrative came from an unexpected source: Margaret Henley, the librarian who had worked with Olivia on 3 different literacy programs. Her comment appeared beneath Jennifer's post at 6 a.m. the next morning, measured and factual in a way that cut through the emotional manipulation. "I've worked with Olivia Brown for over a decade on community projects. She's one of the most generous, hardworking people I know. She organized our annual book drives, coordinated reading programs for underprivileged children, and never once sought recognition for her efforts." David was clearly proud of her contributions to our community. Perhaps instead of rushing to judgment, we should consider that a man as thoughtful as David might have had good reasons for his decisions. The comments sparked a counter-narrative that Jennifer hadn't anticipated. Other community members began sharing their own experiences with Olivia: her work with the church food bank, her volunteer tutoring at the community center, her quiet assistance to families facing hardship. The picture that emerged was of a woman who had spent 15 years giving to Lansing without asking for anything in return. Pastor Thomas Anderson's intervention came on Wednesday morning. He appeared at Olivia's front door carrying a steaming coffee mug and wearing the expression of a man who'd spent considerable time in prayer about a difficult situation. "Mrs. Brown," he said as she invited him into the living room, "I want you to know that I've been fielding calls since yesterday about your character and your marriage to David. I thought you should hear directly from me what I've been telling people." Olivia settled into David's chair, drawing comfort from its familiar embrace. "I appreciate you coming, Pastor. I know this situation is complicated." "It's not complicated at all," Anderson replied with the gentle firmness that made him effective from the pulpit. "I've watched you and David together for 15 years. I've seen how he looked at you during services, how carefully he listened when you spoke, how his entire demeanor changed when you entered a room. That man loved you completely, and anyone who paid attention could see it." He paused, sipping his coffee before continuing. "I've also watched how his children treated you during those same 15 years. The exclusion wasn't subtle, Olivia. It was deliberate and often cruel. I remember the Christmas pageant 3 years ago, when Jennifer reorganized the entire family seating section to accommodate, quote, blood family only. I remember Michael's retirement party for David when you were seated at a separate table from the family. I remember Tyler's daughter's graduation party when you were somehow forgotten from the group photos." The validation hit Olivia like warm sunlight after a long winter. "You saw all of that?" "I saw it. So did many others in our congregation. David's children seemed to think their behavior was invisible. But pastoral work teaches you to notice family dynamics. What I witnessed was a woman trying desperately to belong and a family systematically ensuring she never could." Pastor Anderson reached into his jacket pocket and withdrew a folded piece of paper. "I also wanted you to see this. It's a letter David wrote to me about 6 months ago, asking for guidance about a family matter. He gave me permission to share it if circumstances warranted." Olivia unfolded the letter, recognizing David's handwriting immediately. "Pastor Anderson, I find myself in need of spiritual counsel about a matter that has been weighing heavily on my heart. As you know, I love my children deeply, but I've become increasingly troubled by their treatment of Olivia. Yesterday, she spent 3 hours preparing Michael's favorite meal for his birthday dinner. When he arrived, he barely acknowledged her efforts and spent the evening discussing business matters as if she weren't present. When she tried to join the conversation, offering insights based on her own professional experience, he dismissed her comments with the kind of polite condescension usually reserved for children or servants. This wasn't an isolated incident. It's a pattern that has persisted for 15 years, despite Olivia's continued efforts to build genuine relationships with them. She has shown them nothing but kindness, yet they treat her as an interloper who has no legitimate place in our family. I raised them to be better than this. Linda would be ashamed of their behavior. More importantly, I'm ashamed that I've allowed it to continue for so long in the name of keeping peace. I believe God brought Olivia into my life for a reason. She has made me a better man, a happier man, and a more faithful servant to our community. She deserves better than the treatment my children have given her, and I'm beginning to think that enabling their cruelty through my silence makes me complicit in it. I'm considering making some changes that will force them to confront the consequences of their choices. I would value your prayers and guidance as I navigate this difficult situation. In faith, David's tears blurred Olivia's vision as she read David's words. Even in seeking spiritual counsel, he'd been protecting her by not sharing the full extent of his children's behavior. The letter revealed a man wrestling with the gap between the children he'd raised and the adults they'd become. David came to see me twice more after writing this, Pastor Anderson said gently. We talked extensively about forgiveness, accountability, and the difference between enabling bad behavior and showing Christian love. He wasn't acting out of anger, Olivia. He was acting out of a deep sense of justice and a desire to protect you from further hurt. The conversation was interrupted by a knock at the front door. Through the window, Olivia saw Tyler standing on her porch, his shoulders hunched against more than just the October wind. Pastor Anderson offered to leave, but Olivia asked him to stay. Something about Tyler's posture suggested he needed all the moral support available. Tyler entered the living room like a man approaching a confession booth. His eyes were red-rimmed with exhaustion, and his usual gentle demeanor was strained to the breaking point. I had to come, he said without preamble. I couldn't sleep last night. I kept thinking about Dad's letter, about what he said about me watching and doing nothing. He sank into the chair across from Olivia, his hands clasped tightly in his lap. He was right. I saw what Michael and Jennifer were doing to you for years, and I told myself it wasn't my place to interfere. I told myself you were strong enough to handle it, that you understood they were still processing Mom's death. But that was all bullshit. Excuse me, Pastor. It was all lies I told myself to avoid confrontation. Pastor Anderson leaned forward slightly. What changed your mind, Tyler? Reading Dad's words yesterday. Hearing him describe my silence as complicity. Tyler's voice cracked slightly. I work with families professionally. I teach parents about healthy communication, about standing up for what's right, even when it's difficult. But when it came to my own family, I was a coward. He turned to look directly at Olivia. I remember when you started coming to family dinners after you and Dad got married. You'd bring flowers from your garden, you'd ask about our jobs, our kids, our interests. You remembered everything. Emma's promotion, my struggles with difficult students, even which books I was reading. And we treated you like furniture. Present, but not important. The admission hung in the air like incense, heavy with the weight of recognized sin. I can't undo 15 years of cowardice, Tyler continued, but I can stop being complicit now. Michael's hired lawyers, Jennifer's waging war on social media, and they're both asking me to join their fight against you. I'm here to tell you that I won't. Dad made his choice for good reasons, and I respect both his decision and his reasoning. Olivia felt something shift in her chest. Not forgiveness exactly, but a recognition that redemption was possible even in the aftermath of long-standing hurt. Tyler, I don't deserve your forgiveness, he interrupted. I'm not asking for it. I'm just asking for the chance to do better going forward. Dad's gone, but you're still here, and you're still family whether Michael and Jennifer accept it or not. Pastor Anderson smiled with the satisfaction of someone witnessing grace in action. Perhaps this is what David hoped would happen. Perhaps he believed that accountability might lead to growth. Tyler nodded, wiping his eyes. There's something else you should know. Michael's attorney is planning to challenge your mental fitness, as well as Dad's. They're going to claim that grief made you manipulative, that you're not capable of handling the business responsibilities. It's character assassination disguised as legal strategy. The warning was both helpful and ominous. Olivia had expected challenges to David's will, but attacks on her own competency added another layer of violation to an already painful situation. "Let them come," she said, surprising herself with the steel in her voice. "I taught high school for 30 years, Tyler. I managed budgets, supervised staff, handled crisis situations, and dealt with hostile parents on a daily basis. If they want to question my competency, they'll find I'm better prepared for battle than they assumed." As Tyler prepared to leave, he paused at the door. "Olivia?" Dad's letter mentioned something about not standing up when it mattered. "I want you to know that's changing. If Michael and Jennifer want to destroy you publicly, they'll have to go through me first." Alone again with Pastor Anderson, Olivia reflected on the day's revelations. The battle lines were indeed drawn, but they weren't exactly where she'd expected them. Michael and Jennifer on one side, armed with lawyers and social media campaigns, Tyler moving toward her side, carrying the weight of belated conscience, and herself in the middle, protected by David's love and the community relationships she'd built through years of genuine service. "Pastor," she said as he prepared to leave, "do you think David knew this would happen? Do you think he planned for his children to react this way?" Anderson considered the question carefully. "I think David knew his children well enough to predict their likely responses. But I also think he hoped they might surprise him. The fact that Tyler is beginning to see clearly suggests David's faith in the possibility of growth wasn't entirely misplaced." As evening fell over Lansing, Olivia sat in David's chair and surveyed her new reality. She was no longer the excluded stepmother trying to earn acceptance. She was the inheritor of David's legacy, the keeper of his values, and the target of his children's rage. The war Michael and Jennifer wanted to wage would be expensive, ugly, and public. But for the first time in 15 years, Olivia Brown felt ready for a fight. She had David's love, Tyler's emerging support, and a community that had witnessed her character firsthand. Most importantly, she had the truth, and in her experience as a teacher, truth had a way of prevailing over time, no matter how loudly lies were shouted. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new attacks, new attempts to diminish her worth. But tonight, she would rest in the certainty that she was exactly where David wanted her to be. In his home, surrounded by their shared memories, and empowered to protect the legacy they'd built together. The battle was just beginning. But Olivia Brown was no longer afraid to fight it. The Last Will, Part 7, Taking Control. The Monday morning after Tyler's visit, Olivia stood before the mirror in her bedroom and made a decision that would have seemed impossible just 2 weeks ago. She was going to Brown Auto Parts, not as David's widow seeking comfort, but as the new owner asserting her authority. She chose her outfit with military precision, a charcoal gray pantsuit that projected authority, comfortable flats that would let her walk the factory floor without stumbling, and David's business card holder tucked into her jacket pocket like a talisman. The woman looking back at her from the mirror bore little resemblance to the isolated figure who'd sat alone at David's funeral. Brown Auto Parts occupied a sprawling complex on the industrial side of Lansing, its main building flanked by warehouses that buzzed with the organized chaos of manufacturing. Olivia had visited countless times over the years for company picnics and holiday parties, but always as David's wife. Today, she walked through the front entrance as its owner. The receptionist, Maria Santos, looked up with genuine surprise and sympathy. "Mrs. Brown, how are you holding up? We've all been so worried about you." "Thank you, Maria. I'm here to meet with the management team. Could you ask Patricia Collins to join us in the conference room in 15 minutes? Maria's eyebrows rose slightly at the businesslike tone, but she nodded and reached for her phone. Word traveled fast in a facility that employed 50 people, and by the time Olivia reached the conference room, curious faces were peering through office windows. Patricia Collins arrived precisely on time, her expression a mixture of respect and uncertainty. At 52, Patricia had worked her way up from the assembly line through sheer competence, earning David's trust and the workforce's respect through 2 decades of fair leadership. Her graying hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail, and her handshake was firm with calluses earned through honest work. "Mrs. Brown," Patricia said carefully, "I want to express my condolences again. David was, well, he was the best boss I ever had." "Thank you, Patricia. And please, call me Olivia. We're going to be working together closely." She gestured to the chair across from her. "I assume you've heard about the will reading." Patricia's face reddened slightly. "Some of it's gotten around. People are confused about what happens next." "What's confusing them?" "Well," Patricia shifted uncomfortably, "Michael's been coming by, making some announcements about changes he wants to implement. New efficiency measures, restructuring the profit-sharing program, potentially eliminating some positions to improve margins." Olivia felt a familiar anger rise in her chest, but it was different now, focused and purposeful rather than helpless. "What kind of announcements?" He called a meeting Friday morning with the floor supervisors. Talked about modernizing operations, said the company needed to adapt to stay competitive. He mentioned bringing in outside consultants to evaluate our processes. Patricia paused, choosing her words carefully. "The workers are scared, Mrs. Brown. Some of these people have been here 20 years. They don't understand why Michael's making plans when he doesn't own the company," Olivia finished. "Patricia, I need you to call another meeting with the supervisors. This afternoon, if possible. It's time everyone understood the actual situation." The meeting convened at 2 o'clock in the same conference room where David had made countless decisions that balanced profitability with genuine care for his workforce. The 5 supervisors who filed in represented decades of collective experience and carried the concerns of workers who'd built their lives around the stability David had provided. "I know there's been confusion about the company's future," Olivia began, standing at the head of the table where David had once sat. "I want to clarify the situation immediately. As of last Tuesday, I am the legal owner of Brown Auto Parts. Michael Brown has no authority to make operational decisions or promises about employment." The relief on their faces was immediate and visible. Tom Rodriguez, who'd supervised the machining department for 15 years, spoke first. "Mrs. Brown, we heard rumors about Michael's plans. Are our jobs safe?" "Your jobs are safe," Olivia said firmly. "The profit-sharing program remains in place. The health benefits David fought to provide will continue. And anyone who's been here more than 10 years can consider their position secure as long as they want it." She paused, looking around the table at faces that reflected the demographic diversity of Lansing itself. "I know some of you are wondering if I'm qualified to run this business. I want to be honest. I have a lot to learn about manufacturing, but I spent 30 years managing budgets, supervising staff, and solving problems in high-pressure situations. Most importantly, I understand David's values and his vision for what this company should be." Patricia leaned forward. "What do you need from us?" "I need your expertise, your honesty, and your patience while I get up to speed." "Patricia, David's notebook mentioned that he'd been preparing you for expanded responsibilities. I'd like to discuss making you general manager officially." The promotion had been David's plan, but hearing it confirmed brought tears to Patricia's eyes. "I'd be honored, Mrs. Brown." "There's one more thing," Olivia continued. "I want everyone to understand that this company will continue to operate according to David's principles. We treat our workers fairly, we serve our customers honestly, and we contribute to our community meaningfully. Anyone who has a problem with those values is welcome to find employment elsewhere." The message was clear to everyone in the room. Michael's vision of ruthless efficiency had died with his inheritance expectations. As the meeting concluded, Tom Rodriguez approached her privately. "Mrs. Brown, I hope you don't mind me saying this, but a lot of us knew how Michael and Jennifer treated you over the years. David talked about it sometimes, not complaining, just frustrated. We're glad you're the one in charge now." The comment revealed yet another layer of awareness that Olivia hadn't realized existed. David's frustration with his children's behavior had apparently been visible to his employees, adding another constituency to her growing base of support. By 5 o'clock, word had spread throughout the facility that Olivia Brown was not just the new owner in name, but but a leader prepared to protect everything David had built. The uncertainty that had plagued the workforce since his death began to dissipate, replaced by cautious optimism about the future. As she walked back to her car, Olivia reflected on the day's accomplishments. She'd asserted her authority, protected her workers, and begun building the team she'd need to run David's legacy successfully. More importantly, she discovered that leadership felt natural when it was grounded in genuine care for others. Michael's modernization plans lay in ruins, just like his inheritance expectations. His vision of maximizing profits by minimizing humanity had been rejected before it could take root. The workers who'd feared for their livelihoods now understood that David's widow was David's true heir in values as well as assets. Tomorrow would bring new challenges as Michael's legal team escalated their attacks and Jennifer's social media campaign intensified. But tonight, Olivia Brown would sleep peacefully knowing that she'd taken the first decisive step in protecting everything David had valued: his business, his workers, and the principles that had made Brown Auto Parts more than just a company. She was no longer the excluded stepmother or even the grieving widow. She was the owner, the protector, and the guardian of a legacy that would honor David's memory while securing her own future. The transformation was complete, and there was no going back. The Lansing Community Center had hosted countless town halls over the years, but none quite like the one scheduled for Thursday evening. Ostensibly called to discuss the proposed waterfront development project, everyone knew the real agenda was the inheritance dispute that had split the town's attention for the past 2 weeks. Jennifer's social media campaign had reached beyond Facebook into local news coverage, while stories of Olivia's competent handling of Brown Auto Parts spread through the business community like wildfire. Olivia arrived 15 minutes early, wearing a navy dress that struck the perfect balance between respectful and authoritative. Sarah Johnson walked beside her, a loyal friend serving as both moral support and witness to whatever unfolded. The parking lot was fuller than usual. Controversy had a way of drawing crowds that routine civic engagement couldn't match. Inside, the familiar space buzzed with tension. Folding chairs arranged in neat rows faced a small stage where city council members typically discussed zoning permits and budget allocations. Tonight, those chairs would hold neighbors choosing sides in a family drama that had become a community referendum on character, loyalty, and the true meaning of family. Michael sat in the front row with Sandra, his posture radiating the confidence of a man who believed public opinion would vindicate his position. He'd spent the week making strategic appearances around town, coffee shops, the country club, business association meetings, telling anyone who'd listen about his father's manipulated final months, and the outsider who'd stolen his birthright. Jennifer occupied a seat across the aisle, surrounded by carefully chosen allies from her social circle. Her Instagram account had documented every moment of her fight for family justice, complete with professionally filtered photos of her visiting David's grave and emotionally charged videos about protecting elderly people from predatory influences. Her lawyer husband Paul sat beside her, taking notes on his phone with the practiced efficiency of someone documenting everything for future legal use. Tyler entered alone, his decision to break with his siblings visible in his isolated seating choice. He found a spot in the middle section, far enough from his family to make his position clear, but close enough to hear every word of what promised to be a difficult evening. As residents filed in, Olivia noticed the subtle but unmistakable signs of a community dividing. Margaret Henley from the library sat with Pastor Anderson and several church members who'd worked with Olivia on various projects. Tom Rodriguez and other Brown Auto Parts employees clustered together, their presence a quiet statement of support for their new boss. But scattered throughout were faces that avoided her eyes, people whose opinions had been shaped by Jennifer's carefully crafted narrative of manipulation and betrayal. Mayor Patricia Wells called the meeting to order, her expression carefully neutral despite the charged atmosphere. "We're here tonight to discuss the proposed waterfront development, but I understand there are other community concerns that may need addressing." The waterfront discussion proceeded with unusual speed, as if everyone was eager to reach the evening's real purpose. When the formal agenda concluded, Mayor Wells opened the floor for general comments, and the room's energy shifted perceptibly. Michael rose first, his businessman's training evident in his confident approach to the microphone. I'd like to address something that affects our entire community. My father built Brown Auto Parts as a family business, employing local people and supporting local causes. His legacy deserves protection from those who would exploit his generous nature for personal gain. His voice carried the righteous indignation of someone who genuinely believed his own narrative. David Brown was a trusting man, perhaps too trusting in his final months. When vulnerable elderly people are isolated from their families and influenced by those with financial motives, our entire community suffers. We must protect our seniors from predatory behavior, and we must ensure that legitimate family businesses remain in the hands of those who understand their true value. The statement was carefully crafted to avoid direct accusations, while implying everything Michael wanted the crowd to believe. Several heads nodded in agreement, particularly among those who knew the family's history but had never observed the dynamics closely. But before Michael could continue, Tom Rodriguez stood up in his section. The machining supervisor wasn't comfortable with public speaking, but 15 years of watching workplace injustice had taught him when silence became complicity. "Excuse me," Tom said, his voice carrying the authority of someone who'd earned respect through honest work. "I've worked for David Brown for 15 years, and I think this community deserves to hear from people who actually knew him well." Mayor Wells recognized him with a nod. Tom walked to the microphone with the deliberate steps of a man who'd made a decision he couldn't take back. "David Brown was my boss, but he was also a friend to everyone who worked hard and treated people fairly. And I can tell you something about Mrs. Brown that maybe some of you don't know." He paused, gathering his thoughts. "She's been coming to our company picnics for 15 years. She remembered my daughter's name when she graduated high school. She brought food when my wife was sick with cancer. She organized collections for workers facing hardship." His voice grew stronger as he continued. "But here's what really matters. David talked about her all the time. Not complaining, just proud. Proud of her volunteer work, proud of how she treated people, proud of the woman he'd married. The man I knew wouldn't leave his business to someone he didn't trust completely." Tom's words carried the weight of lived experience, rather than political rhetoric. Several other Brown Auto Parts employees stood in visible support, their presence adding credibility to his testimony. Jennifer rose quickly, clearly unprepared for this turn in the narrative. "That's very touching, but family relationships are complex. What people see in public isn't always what happens in private." Before she could elaborate, Pastor Anderson stood. His presence commanded immediate attention. 15 years of spiritual leadership had earned him a respect that transcended denominational lines. "I've had the privilege of knowing the Brown family through their church involvement for many years," he began, his voice carrying the measured authority of the pulpit. "I've watched David and Olivia together at countless church functions, community events, and volunteer activities. I've also had the opportunity to counsel David about family matters." He paused, letting the significance of that statement register. "What I witnessed was a man deeply in love with his wife and increasingly troubled by his children's treatment of her. David came to me seeking guidance about accountability, forgiveness, and the difference between enabling poor behavior and showing Christian love." The pastor's revelation sent ripples through the crowd. Jennifer's face paled as she realized that her father's spiritual advisor was directly contradicting her narrative. "Christian love," Pastor Anderson continued, "sometimes requires difficult decisions." David's final choices weren't made in anger or confusion, but after careful prayer and consideration. Those choices reflected his values and his assessment of who best embodied the principles he tried to live by. Margaret Henley stood next, her librarian's precision evident in her measured words. "I've worked with Olivia Brown on literacy programs for over a decade. She's organized book drives, coordinated reading programs, and tutored struggling students. She never sought recognition, never demanded credit, never asked for anything in return. The woman I know is incapable of the manipulation being described here." One by one, community members rose to share their experiences with Olivia. The volunteer coordinator from the food bank spoke about her consistent service. The director of the community theater described her willingness to take on thankless backstage roles. A retired teacher recalled Olivia's mentorship of new faculty members during her final years in education. Each testimony built a picture that contradicted Jennifer's carefully constructed narrative. This wasn't a manipulative outsider who'd exploited an elderly man's loneliness. This was a woman who'd spent 15 years giving to a community that had witnessed her character firsthand. But the evening's most powerful moment came when Sarah Johnson took the microphone. Her voice carried the fierce loyalty of a friend who'd watched too much injustice in silence. "I want to talk about the difference between blood family and chosen family," she began. "Blood family is an accident of birth. Chosen family is what happens when people decide to love each other, despite having no obligation to do so." Her words cut through the evening's political maneuvering with emotional honesty. David Brown chose Olivia every day for 15 years. He chose to include her in his business, his community involvement, his deepest concerns. His children had 15 years to choose her too, and they consistently chose exclusion instead. Sarah's voice grew stronger. "Some of you have forgotten that Olivia lost a husband 2 weeks ago. While she was grieving, while she was planning funeral arrangements and dealing with her devastating loss, David's children excluded her from their reception. They erased her from their social media posts. They treated her like a stranger at her own husband's funeral." The reminder of the funeral reception sent murmurs through the crowd. Many had wondered about Olivia's absence from the family gathering, and Sarah's confirmation of deliberate exclusion recast the entire inheritance dispute in a different light. David's will wasn't revenge, Sarah concluded. It was recognition. Recognition of who actually loved him, who actually supported him, who actually embodied the values he tried to teach his children. If his children can't see that, maybe they didn't know their father as well as they thought they did. Michael attempted a rebuttal, but his words felt hollow after the weight of community testimony. His claims of manipulation seemed increasingly desperate when measured against 15 years of observed character and service. As the meeting concluded, the battle lines were clearly drawn. Michael and Jennifer retained support among those who prioritized blood relations and traditional inheritance patterns, but Olivia had something more powerful: the testimony of people who'd witnessed her character through years of consistent action. Walking to her car with Sarah, Olivia felt the weight of community support settling around her like armor. The war wasn't over, but tonight had proven that truth spoken by credible witnesses could overcome carefully crafted narratives. "How do you feel?" Sarah asked as they reached their cars. Olivia looked back at the community center, where small groups still clustered in animated discussion. "I feel like David's watching," she said quietly. "And I think he's proud of what we built together, not just our marriage but our place in this community." Tomorrow would bring new challenges as Michael's legal team escalated their attacks and Jennifer's media campaign adapted to account for the evening's setbacks. But tonight had proven something crucial. When a community knows someone's true character, manufactured scandals lose their power to destroy. Olivia Brown was no longer fighting alone. She had allies, advocates, and witnesses who'd seen her worth long before David's will forced everyone else to recognize it. The battle for David's legacy was becoming a testament to the values he'd actually lived by, and the woman who'd embodied them better than his own children ever had. 6 months after David's death, Olivia knelt beside his grave as April sunlight filtered through the budding maples of Riverside Cemetery. Today would have been his 73rd birthday, a milestone he'd looked forward to celebrating with the quiet contentment of a man who'd found peace in his later years. Instead, she traced his name carved into black granite, while wondering if he could have imagined the war his final gift would unleash. The legal challenges had finally been exhausted 2 weeks ago. Michael's team of aggressive attorneys had filed every conceivable motion, deposed every possible witness, and challenged every aspect of David's mental capacity and Olivia's influence. The result had been exactly what Robert Miller predicted: expensive futility. 3 judges, 2 psychiatric evaluations, and countless hours of testimony had confirmed what David's notebook already proved. His decisions were deliberate, documented, and entirely his own. Jennifer's social media campaign had similarly collapsed under the weight of community testimony. Her carefully filtered narrative of family victimization couldn't survive the authentic voices of people who'd known Olivia for 15 years. The final blow had come when the Lansing Gazette published a comprehensive investigation into the inheritance dispute, featuring interviews with dozens of community members who painted a devastating portrait of the children's behavior toward their stepmother. But Michael and Jennifer weren't finished. Defeat in the courts and public opinion had only concentrated their fury into something more personal and desperate. Olivia was arranging the spring flowers she'd brought, daffodils and tulips from the garden she and David had planted together, when she heard footsteps on the cemetery's gravel path. She looked up to see Michael and Jennifer approaching with the grim determination of people who'd run out of options but not out of rage. Michael reached the grave first, his face showing the strain of 6 months spent watching his assumptions about inheritance and entitlement crumble into legal bills and public humiliation. His expensive suit couldn't hide the weight he'd lost or the lines that stress had carved around his eyes. "Having a nice chat with Dad?" His voice carried a bitterness that made Olivia's chest tighten with something between pity and revulsion. "Telling him how well you've managed to steal everything he built?" Jennifer flanked her brother, her social media polish abandoned in favor of raw hostility. "You must be so proud of yourself. 15 years of planning finally paid off." Olivia rose slowly, brushing dirt from her knees with deliberate calm. She'd known this moment would come, had perhaps been waiting for it since the will reading. The public battles were over, but the personal reckoning had been postponed, not prevented. "I'm here because I miss my husband," she said quietly. "The same husband you excluded me from grieving with." "Your husband?" Michael's laugh was sharp and ugly. "He was our father for 45 years before you showed up. You were a footnote. A late-life mistake he was too lonely to avoid making." The words were calculated to wound, but they bounced off the armor of certainty that David's letters and notebook had provided. Olivia had spent months reading and rereading his private thoughts, absorbing the depth of his love and the breadth of his disappointment in his children. She knew what she'd meant to him, not as a replacement for their mother or a consolation for loneliness, but as a partner who'd helped him become the man he'd always wanted to be. "Your father wasn't lonely when he found me," she replied, her voice steady as granite. "He was healing. He was ready to love again, ready to build something new instead of just preserving something old. You couldn't accept that because it meant acknowledging that life continued after your mother's death." Jennifer stepped closer, her face flushed with anger. "Don't you dare talk about our mother. You never knew her, never earned the right to be compared to her." "I'm not comparing myself to Linda," Olivia said firmly. "I never tried to replace her or erase her memory. But you used her as a weapon against me for 15 years. As if loving your father meant betraying her somehow." She gestured toward the headstone that bore both David's name and Linda's, side by side as he'd requested. "Your father loved your mother deeply. Her death devastated him. But when he was ready to love again, he chose me. Not because I was like her, but because I was myself. You spent 15 years punishing me for being loved by a man who'd earned the right to choose his own happiness." Michael's composure finally cracked completely. "He wouldn't have chosen you if you hadn't manipulated him. You isolated him from his family, made him think we didn't care about him." "I isolated him?" Olivia's voice carried 15 years of accumulated hurt, transformed into righteous fury. "You isolated yourselves. Every family dinner where you talked around me like I wasn't there. Every holiday where you made plans without including me. Every grandchild's birthday where I was forgotten from the guest list. That was your choice, not mine." She pulled David's notebook from her purse, its leather cover worn smooth from months of rereading. "Your father documented it all, Michael. Every slight, every exclusion, every moment when you made it clear that I wasn't really family. July 15th, you discussed your business expansion plans for 20 minutes while I sat at the same table. And when I offered insights based on my experience managing school budgets, you dismissed me with, 'That's different.' August 22nd, you told someone at the grocery store that my volunteer work was sweet but desperate, as if kindness was a character flaw. Michael's face went white as she quoted his father's observations with devastating precision. "He was spying on us?" "He was watching his family," Olivia corrected. "He was hoping you'd grow into the people he'd raised you to be. When you didn't, he stopped making excuses for your behavior and started documenting it instead." Jennifer snatched for the notebook, but Olivia stepped back, clutching it protectively. "That's private property stolen from our father." "This is a record of your father's growing disappointment in your character," Olivia replied coldly. "It's a chronicle of 15 years of chances you refused to take, kindness you couldn't recognize, and love you wouldn't accept because it came from someone you'd decided wasn't worthy of it." She opened the notebook to a marked page and began reading in David's voice. Jennifer organized Emma's baby shower without consulting Olivia, despite Olivia having coordinated 3 previous family showers. When I asked why Olivia wasn't included in the planning, Jennifer said it was, quote, "family only. The casual exclusion of my wife from family events has become so normalized that my children don't even recognize it as cruelty anymore." The words hit Jennifer like physical blows. She'd probably forgotten the incident entirely, but David had preserved it as evidence of a pattern that had broken his heart. Michael announced his engagement at Sunday dinner, Olivia continued reading. The entire family celebrated, made toasts, discussed wedding plans. Olivia offered to help with preparations, mentioning her experience coordinating school events. Michael thanked his father for the offer of assistance, but never acknowledged that the offer had come from Olivia. It was as if she'd never spoken. Michael's anger was transforming into something that looked like shame, but he fought against the recognition. "Those are taken out of context. Dad didn't understand the complexity." "Your father understood perfectly," Olivia interrupted. "He understood that you'd decided I wasn't real family, so my feelings didn't matter, my contributions didn't count, and my presence was something to be tolerated rather than welcomed." She turned to a page near the end of the notebook. "Here's what he wrote 3 weeks before he died. I raised my children to be kind, generous, and inclusive. Instead, they've become entitled, selfish, and cruel to the woman who's made me happier than I thought possible at this stage of life. I love them, but I can no longer enable their behavior by pretending it's acceptable. Olivia deserves better than what they've given her, and I'm going to make sure she gets it." The cemetery fell silent except for the rustle of wind through new leaves. David's final assessment of his children hung in the air like a verdict that couldn't be appealed. Tyler's voice broke the silence. He was right. They all turned to see David's youngest son approaching across the grass, his face wet with tears, but his posture straighter than Olivia had seen it in years. He'd been coming to his father's grave regularly since the will reading, she knew. Pastor Anderson had mentioned seeing him there, sometimes sitting for hours as if conducting conversations with the dead. "Dad was right about all of it," Tyler continued, his voice growing stronger with each word. "I have spent 6 months reading his notebook. Olivia let me borrow it, and every entry made me realize how blind I'd been, how complicit." Michael turned on his youngest brother with desperate fury. "Tyler, don't let her manipulate you too. She's not manipulating me." Tyler's shout echoed across the cemetery, startling a flock of sparrows from a nearby oak. "I'm finally seeing clearly for the first time in 15 years. Dad documented what we did because he hoped we'd change. When we didn't, he took action." Tyler walked to Olivia's side, a gesture of alliance that cost him his siblings but freed him from years of cowardice. "I remember Mom, Michael. I remember how kind she was. How she included everyone. How she made people feel welcome and valued. You dishonored her memory by treating Olivia the way you did. Mom would be ashamed of who we became." Jennifer's composure shattered completely. "How dare you? How dare I what? Tell the truth?" Tyler's voice carried the authority of someone who'd finally found his courage. "How dare I admit that we treated Dad's wife like garbage for 15 years? How dare I acknowledge that the inheritance wasn't theft? It was justice?" He turned to face his siblings directly. "Dad left us $50,000 each. Do you know what that represents? It's more than most people inherit from their parents. It's security, opportunity, a head start in life. But instead of being grateful, you've spent 6 months and probably twice that amount in legal fees trying to take away the inheritance of a woman who earned it through 15 years of kindness you refuse to acknowledge." Michael made one final attempt to salvage his narrative. The business should stay in the family. It did stay in the family, Olivia said quietly. It stayed with the family member who understood what it meant to your father, not as a source of personal wealth, but as a responsibility to the community and the people who depend on it for their livelihoods. She looked at each of David's children in turn, seeing them clearly for perhaps the first time, not as obstacles to her acceptance, but as people who'd chosen fear over love, entitlement over empathy, exclusion over inclusion. David had tried to teach them better, and their failure to learn had broken his heart. "Your father didn't leave me his estate because he stopped loving you," she said finally. "He left it to me because he finally stopped enabling your inability to love me. There's a difference, and it's a difference that will define the rest of your lives." Michael and Jennifer stood in the spring sunlight, defeated by truth they could no longer deny or escape. Their legal challenges had failed, their public campaign had backfired, and now even their brother had chosen conscience over family loyalty. "This isn't over," Michael said, but the words lacked conviction. "Yes, it is," Tyler replied firmly. "It's been over since the moment you decided that Dad's happiness mattered less than your resentment. Since the moment you decided that blood relation mattered more than character. Since the moment you chose cruelty over kindness." Michael and Jennifer walked away across the cemetery grass, their shadows long in the afternoon sun. They would continue their lives diminished by their choices, haunted by a father's disappointment and a brother's defection. Richer in money than they might have been, but poorer in every way that mattered. Tyler remained with Olivia beside David's grave, both of them looking down at the name carved in stone, the name of a man who'd loved imperfectly but chosen wisely, who'd enabled his children's cruelty through kindness, but finally found the courage to demand better. "Do you think he can see this?" Tyler asked quietly. Olivia touched the smooth granite, feeling the warmth the sun had gathered there. "I think he knows that love won," she said. "I think he knows that truth prevailed, and I think he knows that at least one of his children finally chose to be the person he tried to raise." As they walked away together, leaving David to rest in the peace that had eluded him in his final years of family conflict, Olivia felt the weight of 6 months of battle lifting from her shoulders. The war was over, the victory complete, and David's final gift had accomplished exactly what he'd intended. Not revenge against his children, but recognition for the woman who'd loved him without reservation and justice for years of unrequited kindness. Tomorrow would bring the business of living with her inheritance, and the responsibility of honoring David's legacy. But today, she could finally grieve properly, knowing that the man who'd chosen her had been vindicated in his choice, and that at least one of his children had learned what love actually meant. 1 year after David's death, the annual Brown Auto Parts picnic hummed with an energy that reminded Olivia why her husband had loved these gatherings. The company parking lot had been transformed into a festival ground, with striped tents sheltering long tables laden with potluck dishes and a makeshift stage where the Lansing High School Jazz Ensemble provided musical accompaniment to conversations that flowed as freely as the October breeze. Olivia moved through the crowd with the confidence of someone who'd grown into her role rather than inherited it. The navy blue sundress she'd chosen projected casual authority while remaining approachable, a balance she'd learned to strike during her transition from teacher to business owner. At 68, she carried herself with the purposeful grace of a woman who'd discovered that power, when used correctly, felt more like service than dominance. "Mrs. Brown!" 8-year-old Marcus Rodriguez tugged at her elbow, his face bright with excitement. "My dad says you're giving out scholarships today." Olivia smiled down at Tom Rodriguez's youngest son, remembering when she'd felt intimidated by the prospect of addressing her employees' families. Now these children felt like extensions of the community she and David had helped nurture. "That's right, Marcus. We're announcing the first recipients of the David Brown Memorial Scholarship." She'd established the scholarship fund 6 months ago, using a portion of the inheritance that Michael had assumed would be his. The irony wasn't lost on her. Money that David's eldest son had planned to use for personal luxury would instead send deserving students to college, perpetuating David's values in ways Michael had never imagined. Patricia Collins approached with the easy familiarity that had developed between them as they'd learned to run the business together. At 53, Patricia had grown into her role as general manager with the same steady competence that had earned David's trust years before his death. Her promotion had eliminated the need for daily owner involvement while ensuring that David's principles remained embedded in every operational decision. "The scholarship announcements are ready," Patricia said, handing Olivia a folder containing the selection committee's recommendations. 5 recipients this year, all children of current or retired employees, just like you wanted. The scholarship criteria reflected David's belief that loyalty should flow in both directions. Employees who'd invested their careers in Brown Auto Parts would see their children's educational dreams supported by the company their dedication had helped build. It was circular generosity that David would have appreciated. Success creating opportunity that fostered more success. Olivia scanned the list of recipients, recognizing surnames that appeared on the company roster and in David's stories about workplace families. The Martinez daughter who wanted to study engineering, the Thompson son pursuing business management, the Chen daughter planning to become a teacher. Each scholarship represented a family's dreams made achievable through David's continued generosity. "Has Tyler arrived yet?" Olivia asked, looking toward the entrance where employees and their families continued to stream in. "About 10 minutes ago," Patricia replied. "He's over by the dessert table with Emma and the kids. Still looks a little nervous about being here." Tyler's attendance at company events had been a gradual process. The cemetery confrontation with his siblings 6 months ago had liberated him from family loyalty that had become toxic, but it had also left him unsure of his place in Olivia's life. Their relationship was rebuilding slowly, based on mutual respect rather than the forced acceptance that had characterized his marriage to David's other children. Olivia found Tyler helping his daughter navigate the dessert table's overwhelming options, while his son chased a friend between the picnic tables. Emma stood nearby, her previous discomfort with family dynamics replaced by genuine warmth toward the woman her husband had finally learned to defend. Olivia! Tyler's 10-year-old daughter Lily ran to hug her with the unself-conscious affection of a child who'd been told she could love whomever she chose. "Dad says you're like our grandmother now." The description brought tears to Olivia's eyes. She'd never had biological grandchildren, had never experienced the unique joy of loving children who carried forward pieces of people she'd loved. But Tyler's decision to include her in his family had given her something she'd never expected: the chance to be chosen as family by the next generation. "I like being your grandmother," Olivia replied, returning the hug with the fierce protectiveness she'd developed toward Tyler's children. They represented hope, proof that family patterns could be broken, that kindness could be learned, that love could expand rather than contract when given the chance. Tyler approached with the careful smile of someone still learning to believe in his own redemption. "Thank you for including us today. The kids have been looking forward to this for weeks." "This is their legacy too," Olivia said simply. "Your father would want them to understand what he built and why it mattered to him." The afternoon progressed with the comfortable rhythm of a tradition that had evolved but retained its essential character. Employees and their families shared food and stories, children played games organized by volunteers, and the subtle barriers between management and labor dissolved in the democracy of shared celebration. When time came for the scholarship announcements, Olivia took the makeshift stage with an ease that would have surprised her former self. Teaching had prepared her for public speaking, but addressing her employees' families felt different, more personal, more consequential than classroom instruction. David Brown believed that success was meaningless unless it created opportunities for others. She began, her voice carrying clearly across the assembled crowd. He built this company not just to manufacture auto parts, but to manufacture possibilities. For workers, for families, for the community we all share. She held up the folder containing the scholarship recipients. "Today we're announcing the first 5 recipients of the David Brown Memorial Scholarship. These scholarships aren't charity. They're investments in young people whose families have invested in our company's success." One by one, she called the recipients' names, watching as families erupted in celebration and tears. The Martinez family embraced their daughter, while Tom Rodriguez beamed with pride at his colleagues' recognition. The ceremony felt like David's presence made manifest, his values continuing to create change in the world, even after his physical absence. As the formal announcements concluded, Sarah Johnson took the microphone for what had become her traditional toast at company events. Sarah's presence at these gatherings had evolved from supporting Olivia to genuinely enjoying the community David had built around his business. "I want to talk about the difference between inheritance and legacy," Sarah began, her voice carrying the authority of someone who'd witnessed Olivia's complete transformation. "Inheritance is what gets passed down automatically. Legacy is what gets earned through living according to principles that matter." She gestured toward Olivia, who stood at the edge of the stage feeling simultaneously exposed and supported by her friend's words. A year ago, some people thought Olivia inherited David's business by accident or manipulation. What we've learned is that she inherited it because she embodied the values David tried to live by: kindness, inclusivity, genuine care for other people's welfare. The crowd's response was immediate and warm, a validation that had taken months to build but now felt unshakable. These people had worked for David for decades. Their approval of his widow couldn't be bought or manufactured. It had to be earned through consistent demonstration of character. "David's legacy isn't just Brown Auto Parts," Sarah continued. "It's the scholarship fund, the employee benefits that other companies have eliminated, the profit-sharing program that treats workers like partners. Most importantly, it's the proof that choosing kindness over cruelty creates better outcomes for everyone." As the afternoon wound down, Olivia found herself standing with Tyler near the spot where David used to position himself during these events, close enough to observe everything but far enough away to let others take center stage. The symbolism wasn't lost on either of them. "Do you think he would be proud?" Tyler asked, watching his children play with the sons and daughters of people whose livelihoods depended on decisions David had made decades ago. "I think he would be amazed," Olivia replied honestly, "not by the business success or the community support, but by the fact that his children finally understand what family actually means." Tyler nodded, his eyes following his daughter as she shared her dessert with a younger child. "I spent so many years thinking family was about blood and tradition and preserving what came before. I never realized it was about creating something better for the people who come after." As the sun began to set over Lansing, employees and their families started the gradual process of cleaning up and heading home. Children protested the end of festivities, while parents gathered leftovers and folded chairs with the efficient teamwork of people who'd participated in countless similar events. Olivia helped with the cleanup, but her real attention was focused on the conversations happening around her: workers discussing their children's college plans made possible by scholarship funding, families making plans for next year's picnic, communities strengthening through shared celebration. Tyler's family was among the last to leave, his children reluctant to end their time with the grandmother who'd entered their lives through tragedy but stayed through choice. As they prepared to go, Lily presented Olivia with a crayon drawing she'd made during the afternoon's art activities. The picture showed stick figures holding hands in front of a building labeled "Grandpa David's Work." In the center stood a figure with silver hair and a blue dress, surrounded by smiling faces of various sizes. At the bottom, in careful second-grade letters, Lily had written, "Our Family." The simple artwork contained everything Olivia had spent 15 years trying to achieve with David's biological children: recognition, inclusion, love offered and accepted without reservation. That it had come from the next generation, unencumbered by old grievances and inherited prejudices, felt like redemption and hope combined. As Tyler's family drove away, Olivia stood alone in the empty parking lot, where she'd once felt like an outsider at her husband's company events. Now surrounded by the evidence of celebration and community, she felt the deep satisfaction of someone who'd not just survived profound loss, but had transformed it into lasting meaning. The evening was warm for October, and she found herself walking to David's grave as had become her custom after important events. The cemetery was quiet except for the rustle of fallen leaves and the distant hum of traffic from the town they'd both loved. "We did it," she said quietly, settling onto the bench that the cemetery had installed near his headstone, a gift from Brown Auto Parts employees who'd wanted a place to visit their former boss. "The scholarship fund is working, the business is thriving, and Tyler's children call me Grandma." She pulled Lily's drawing from her purse, studying the stick figure family that included her without question or reservation. "I think you'd like what we've built, David. It's not the family you started with, but it's the family you dreamed of. People choosing to love each other, choosing to do better, choosing to create something bigger than themselves." A gentle breeze stirred the leaves around his grave, and Olivia chose to interpret it as approval. She'd spent a year learning to live without David's physical presence, but his influence continued to shape every decision, every scholarship awarded, every act of kindness that rippled outward from the principles he'd tried to instill in his children. Michael and Jennifer were absent from her thoughts now, their anger and resentment relegated to the category of problems that had solved themselves through their own choices. They'd chosen bitterness over growth, entitlement over empathy, and they would live with those consequences while she built something better with the family members who'd chosen differently. As she walked back to her car, Olivia reflected on the year's transformation. She'd begun as the excluded stepmother, evolved into the vindicated widow, and had finally become something she'd never expected: the matriarch of a chosen family that included Tyler's children, Sarah's friendship, the Brown auto parts community, and everyone whose life had been touched by David's continuing legacy. The woman who'd sat alone at David's funeral was gone, replaced by someone who understood that belonging isn't granted by others. It's created through the choices we make about how to treat the people around us. David had chosen her every day for 15 years, and now she was choosing to honor that choice by building the kind of family he'd always wanted them to be. Tomorrow would bring new challenges as the business continued to grow and the scholarship fund expanded to serve more families. There would be decisions to make, relationships to nurture, and legacies to build. But tonight, surrounded by the evidence of love multiplied through generosity, Olivia Brown went home to the house she'd shared with David, no longer haunted by the ghosts of rejection, but warmed by the presence of acceptance that had finally, permanently, become her own. The inheritance that had seemed like David's final gift had revealed itself to be something far more valuable, the foundation for a new beginning that honored the past while creating hope for the future. In choosing to love generously rather than guard jealously, Olivia had discovered that the greatest legacy isn't what we leave behind, but what we inspire others to build upon. And in the quiet of her home, surrounded by memories of the man who'd seen her worth when others couldn't, Olivia Brown planned for a future that would make David proud. A future built on the radical idea that family is what happens when people choose to love each other well. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us. Quote.